Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is Alan. As moviegoers like you and I become more knowledgeable about the world around us, filmmakers are also forced to focus on the more nuanced details in their movies. Because as important as the plot is, glaring mistakes and unbelievable background information can shatter the immersion of the viewer, which is not what the director wants happening. This can clearly be seen in the science fiction genre, especially when it comes to films about space travel. Today I want to take a look at 5 different spaceships and talk about the design elements built into them that make them quite realistic. The Mk2SA-23E Mitchell Hyundai Starfury is the standard deep space interdiction and recon fighter for Earth Force. It first entered service in the 2240s and would remain in active duty for another 40 years. While the Starfury looks quite similar to another famous starfighter, the Incom T-65 X-Wing with its quad-engine setup, the Starfury was actually designed purposely by the creators of Babylon 5 to showcase how space combat would actually work. Which is why the quad engine setup on the Starfury is put at the wingtips of the vessel to give it superior maneuverability and allow it to rotate quickly on its axis. In most franchises, including Star Wars, the starfighters behave as if they were flying around in atmosphere, with their engines burning continuously, trying to maintain momentum, lift, and energy. The Starfury instead relies on its thrusters the same way that modern spaceships would, firing off controlled bursts to rotate and propel them in the right direction. The design ended up being so practical that NASA engineers actually approached the makers of the show to talk more about the Starfury platform, which they wanted to remake into a cargo hauling spacecraft. Unfortunately, that ship was never made by NASA. The Avalon is a long-range corporate sleeper ship. In its pods are 5,000 souls and 258 crew members. Their destination is the planet of Homestead 2, more than 120 years of travel away from Earth. A few of the ships on this list are as large as the Avalon and most likely way too large to create on Earth's surface. It'd be much more economical for a ship the size of the Avalon to rely on an orbital shipyard and deep space mining. Luckily, the film takes place in 2343. That's more than enough time for humanity to get its act together and start such an operation. We already have companies like Planetary Resources, Deep Space Industries, and Resource Development Administration looking into these possibilities. Well, actually, one of the companies I just mentioned is from a sci-fi movie, but the other 2 are real. The Avalon uses 8 nuclear fission engines to power it along. Currently, fission energy is the most powerful type of energy that we can harness without getting into theoretical designs. The problem is reactors are quite large, especially the ones that are going to be powerful enough to push along this ship. It's not something that you can easily launch into space from the ground, and you would most likely have to assemble it in space as well. But again, if you have the ability to construct ships in orbit because you have designed a shipyard, size becomes less of a problem and there's more than enough space on the Avalon for these kinds of reactors. This also means that the Avalon does not need to be designed to withstand the pressures of atmospheric travel. The Avalon generates artificial gravity by rotating around like a centrifuge. Without gravity, the human body quickly loses muscle mass and bone density. Astronauts actually have to follow a pretty strict workout regime to make sure that doesn't happen to them on the ISS, which doesn't have artificial gravity. But since the entire crew in the Avalon is sleeping for 120 years, some sort of gravity will definitely need to be there to make sure that their bodies don't completely turn into mush. Which leads us to the hibernation chambers. We did an entire video about this subject if you want to check it out here. Basically, with our current technology, we could induce hypothermia in an individual or put them into a medically induced coma. Both procedures will have some major risks involved, obviously. And also, it won't completely freeze their biological clocks and only really slows down their metabolism to a certain rate so they don't need to consume as many resources during the trip. We currently don't have the technology or material science to somehow freeze a person without killing them. Apparently, the human body has a lot of water in it, and when water freezes in a blood vessel, it makes a mess of things. Don't believe me? Freeze a potato and then thaw it out. See what happens. Well, actually, the inside of a potato is nothing like the inside of a human being, but I recently accidentally froze a potato, and it was devastating. Through our research, we also found out that certain animals, mostly reptiles, can freeze their bodies for the winter and reanimate once the weather becomes warmer. Some animals do this by producing glucose and saturating their bodies with it. This prevents ice crystals from forming from the blood. So 300 years from now, who knows what kind of technology they can figure out. Maybe they'll even figure out how to put us in hypersleep chambers that won't kill us, explode our blood vessels, and actually keep us from aging. I also love the idea that different crew members pay for different levels of service, accommodation, and even food. If this is a corporate entity running the operation, I can definitely see some penny-pitching middle manager coming up with ways to squeeze extra money out of the customers. Just look at how airlines have evolved throughout the years. Flying used to be a very luxurious thing, but decades later things are becoming more commercialized and competitive, and now we have to pay extra for almost everything. I'm pretty sure soon they'll be selling us tickets to sit inside the cargo hold. The Endurance was humanity's last hope, and it's so fitting that Matt Damon almost selfishly destroyed it. Designed by NASA for interplanetary travel, the clunky but realistic Starship was assembled in Earth's low orbit piece by piece. In total, the ship had 12 individual modules arranged in a ring shape. Each module housed something important like one of the reactors, crew quarters, comms, hibernation tanks, and so on. In the middle of the ship are 2 landing vehicles and 2 Ranger shuttles. The entire ship rotates at around 5.5 RPMs to produce Earth-like gravity for the crew on board. The structure of this design is quite realistic, especially if you take a look at humanity's current capabilities. I also like how it's a very redundant design and completely Matt Damon proof. No matter what he throws at the ship, there always seems to be a backup measure planned. The Endurance is propelled into space by high-thrust plasma engines, which are powered by 4 nuclear fusion reactors. Nuclear fusion is far more powerful and efficient than nuclear fission, which is what the Avalon used. Whereas fission involves collecting energy from splitting an atom, fusion collects energy from combining atoms together. The problem with creating a fusion reaction is you need a ridiculous amount of pressure and temperature to make it all possible. An example of a stable fusion reaction would be our sun. Now, we are in the beginning processes of trying to replicate such a reaction here on Earth. Just recently, scientists in Australia secured patents for a revolutionary laser-triggered nuclear fusion reaction using hydrogen and boron. This new method eliminates the need for extremely high temperatures to sustain the reaction that current methods like the tokamak device needs. If we can figure out the secrets of harnessing fusion, we might be looking at a true clean energy transformation of our entire society. It will be useful not only in space but also in our everyday lives. Star Wars is usually more science fantasy than fiction, which really is what separates it from the other franchises. But every now and then they delve into some really interesting ideas and technology. Count Dooku in Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, flies around in a heavily modified Punwarka 116 class interstellar sloop. It's quite different from any other ship we see in the franchise, and that's because instead of using thrusters like most Star Wars ships, Dooku's yacht relies on an ancient Greek artifact known as a solar sail. Solar sails are quite similar to regular sails found on ocean-going vessels, but instead of using wind, solar sails harness the sun's energy and radiation. This setup requires no fuels and works as long as there's enough sunlight in the region. NASA and several other government and private space agencies have been looking into this technology to propel future ships and probes. Solar sails in general have to be quite large and made of a very, very thin material. But Dooku's solar sailor is made out of some type of special material created by a lost ancient civilization. It was apparently a gift from Pago the Lesser, leader of Geonosis. Rich people really love giving other rich people very exclusive things. It's a complete power play. This is why Dooku's solar sail was said to be much faster and more efficient than other more traditional sails that could be found in the Star Wars universe. It should be noted that solar sails collect energy very, very gradually, which means that their acceleration is almost non-existent, especially in the beginning of a run. In the long term, they probably beat out any other ship when it comes to sublight speed in Star Wars, but if you need to make a quick getaway or abruptly stop, I would look elsewhere for solutions. Perhaps a bit too large for Earth's current capabilities, the Hermes spacecraft is an extremely ambitious global effort to take space travel to the next level and finally allow humans to safely journey to the Red Planet. Built in collaboration between the United States, the EU, Japan, Russia, and India, the Hermes was constructed in low Earth orbit using the fictional SpaceX space station as a building platform. Roughly the size of the current ISS, the Hermes ship will be used in the Ares program and upon retirement become the new International Space Station. Powered by a nuclear reactor and solar panels, the Hermes will be using ion thrust for propulsion. While underpowered and lacking acceleration compared to chemical rockets, ion thrusters are extremely fuel efficient and can accelerate gradually over time, which is useful on the longer journey to Mars. Ion engines have been in development by NASA since the late 1950s. The Deep Space Probe launched in 1998 and was the first NASA craft to use ion propulsion. The Hermes, like most of the ships on this list, also has a rotating wheel which generates artificial gravity for the crew. During all of the Ares missions, the Hermes is constantly flying back and forth between Earth and Mars. Each crew that rotates onto the Hermes must take NASA's Orion space capsule powered by the Delta IV Heavy booster. In real life, so far the Orion space capsule has only undergone unmanned tests. So those are 5 ships that use interesting technology and methods that we might also use here on Earth in the next 100 years. This is why I really like science fiction. There's always some truth to all of the creativity and imagination out there, and a lot of research that can be done if you want to get deeper into these stories. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our content. And as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you life is a movie and you are the protagonist.